Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, comrades, all citizens of the world, wherever you're going, wherever you've been, and wherever you're at, we welcome you to the Live from the Heartland show here on YouTube. New episodes air every Friday at 9 a.m. Central Time with individual interviews posted throughout the following week. I'm your host, Michael James, encouraging you to take the chain from the brain, to get back in the people's game, because it's time to move from the lower level to the higher, from the shallower to the deeper, from the one-sided to the many, and from the abstract to the concrete. So without further ado, let's get it on. Welcome you all, you citizens of the world. Once again, it's Michael James up here in Chicago's 49th Ward with another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is for the week of March 16th in the year 2024, and we are recording it a few days early, Monday, March 11th. Our guest today will be the musician Steven Hashimoto, and a little bit later, Peter Kuttner and Shelby Brand, talking about the Workers' Rights Film Festival and some labor action. I don't really have any bad things to report this week. There's plenty of bad and evil things going on, but I'm going to stress some good things. I think that Biden's State of the Union address on this past Thursday night allayed the fears of many people who were worried that he might stumble and fall. He was blissed out. He walked in. He addressed a lot of things. He took on the challenges from right-wing Republicans as they yelled from the floor. And he did refer to migrants and people seeking asylum as illegals, but did apologize for that. All in all, I think, our work is cut out for us, that if we want to protect democracy, we have to realize that everything is not perfect. One of the other things that Biden did address was Israel and Palestine, and was a little bit soft on that, we think. But there is some motion in that, and we will address that in weeks to come because it's continuing. Here in Chicago, those of you who are paying attention, and we hope most of you are, because we do have an election coming up and you can vote now, early voting. One of the things that was on the ballot was Bring Chicago Home, a measure that would tax building sales of over $1 million, and the money would go to dealing with homelessness in Chicago, a problem not only here, but throughout the country. And this is something that's been tried in other places. It's worked. The real estate interests put up a lot of money to fight it. A judge said it had to come off the ballot or the votes wouldn't count. That was reversed this past week. So you can vote for Bring Chicago Home, and it is on the ballot. And as of now, the votes will count. One of the other things going on the labor front, the Museum of Contemporary Art employees here in Chicago have made their intentions known to form a union with AFSCME, American Federation of Service and County Municipal Employees. It continues a pretty strong and ongoing wave of union organizing by cultural workers here in Chicago, and we wish them well, all those workers at the Museum of Contemporary Art, in getting their union. On the international front, France has become the world's first country to enshrine abortion rights in its constitution. Overwhelmingly, the French Parliament passed it 780 to 72, and the amendment states that there is a guaranteed freedom to abortion in France. Following the vote, the Eiffel Tower was lit up with the words, "My body, my choice." And one of the most moving things that I did this week was to attend a memorial for our good friend Marilyn Katz, who passed away. Those of you who listen to the show know that just a couple of weeks before Marilyn passed, on October 26th, we had her on the show. And, she's just a wonderful woman, a real good organizer. I first met her when we were recruiting her from Northwestern to work in Uptown back in 1966 with Join Community Union. She went on to work for Harold Washington. She worked with a lot of people. She's real active in J Street, very concerned about what was going on in the Middle East. It was quite a celebration. There were 3 Congress people there, Chuy Garcia, Jan Schakowsky, and the former chairman of the Black Panther Party, the one and only, I got to get his name straight, Bobby Rush. And I did have a nice conversation with both Bobby and with Jan. There were people I hadn't seen in many years. People came from other parts of the country to celebrate Marilyn. We do miss her truly. Okay, enough of the introduction. We're going to get going with a little bit of music, and we will be back with our first guest, the one and only Steve Hashimoto, one hell of a musician, a real hard-working musician here in Chicago. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of March 16th. And one of the things I always look forward to, usually it's on a Sunday, sometimes it's on a Monday, is I get an email from this guy. His name is Steve Hashimoto. And you can probably see him on the screen if you're viewing the show, or you'll hear his voice shortly. But he does a weekly e-news called News from the Trenches. And basically, he includes not only what gigs he has as a musician, and he's a serious play all the time jazz musician out there in Chicagoland, but also information on what's going on among other musicians when people have passed. And he has a little bit of a marketplace at the end with cool books that he's done or that he has and various other things. So without further ado, as they used to say, how are you, Steve?
Pretty good, Mike.
Tell us a little bit about your where you grew up and how you got involved in music, because I want to focus on your music today and where people can hear you play and et cetera.
Well, I grew up in Chicago. I've lived in Chicago my whole life. Grew up basically in Edgewater and kind of Rogers Parkish. And I met you through Rising Up Angry.
Right.
Because I was in a rock band in the late 60s, early 70s. We eventually were called Wacker Drive.
I remember.
There were several Wacker Drives in Chicago, just as there are several Wacker Drive streets. But we played a couple of Rising Up Angry dances, and we were interviewed for the newspaper, and the guys in my band I was the only guy in the band that was not from their neighborhood. They all went to Amundsen and Lane High School, and I went to Senn. So we should have the interview in your basement because I had Chicago Seed and Rising Up Angry covers on my wall, and I had hippie posters, and they just figured that I would be able to answer any political questions that your interviewer asked me. And I don't know who it was who interviewed us, and I don't have much recollection of it. But I do know that was the beginning of our connection with each other. So that probably would have been in 1970.
We'll look through and see if I can find that interview.
I'd love to see that.
After you played in this rock band, Wacker Drive, tell us a little bit about your music career in Chicago, because I basically think you are what we would call a gigging musician, a jobber. You are playing gigs, working with different bands as well as your own band. Talk about how you move from Whacker Drive and rock and roll, becoming a full-time, lifelong musician, and what that
Well,
entails?
so in Whacker Drive, I played trumpet, and that was kind of when I joined the band, we were a soul band. So we were a white soul band, a white greaser soul band.
With one Asian American.
Well, my cousin also was in the band.
Oh, two of you
and
guys.
We also had a Cuban singer. So for a greaser band on the north side, we were pretty diverse, you know. But that was kind of the beginning of the Chicago blood, sweat, and tears horn band era. So that's why I was in the band. But then when the scene started to turn towards hard rock, uh, the band changed, the music changed, and I. This is kind of a technical term, but I blew my chops out from playing loud rock and roll music on the trumpet, and I couldn't play anymore. So the band dissolved, and I became a guitar player, and I played guitar gigging for a while. Still wasn't quite a full-time professional musician, although I started my original, well, it wasn't original at the time, my jazz fusion band called Mothra's Revenge, like the Japanese uh, monster movie, Mothra.
I got it.
And so I played guitar in that band. And then an older bebop musician in Evanston named Jack Hubble called me one day and said, one of the guys in your band suggested I called you because I need a bass player this Saturday. And although he didn't say this, I just assumed every bass player in Chicago was working that Saturday. And he said, I've got a Fender bass that you can borrow for the gig. Uh, and this is bebop language. He said, do you have eyes to make the gig? And I said, well, yeah. And so he asked me to come over to his house and play through a couple songs with him and see if it was going to be a disaster or not. And I guess I passed the audition. I became a bass player. And from that day on, I pretty much never stopped gigging because everybody needs bass players. So that was 1978, I think. And so I always tell people the difference between me and most other bass players my age is that my first gigs as a bass player were not rock and roll gigs. I was playing bebop and I was playing jazz standards from the moment I started playing bass. And so I was working immediately with older guys who were much better players than I was. And I was getting my butt kicked every night on the bandstand. I was getting yelled at all the time, but eventually I learned how to play that music, and it wasn't until very long after I became a professional musician that I even played rock and roll on the bass. So I find that I'm kind of still learning how to play pop music and rock and roll on the bass. I've been playing jazz on the bass since 1979. Uh, uh, and when you say a jobbing musician, what that means to us on the scene is we play any kind of gig that anybody calls us to play. Now,
That's
I make a caveat about that. I will only take gigs that I feel that I'm really qualified to play. I don't know much about certain styles of music. And so I'm not going to take those kinds of gigs because I don't want to stink up the band. But I play weddings, I play corporate music, I still play a lot of jazz. I play in several original rock and roll bands, uh, Americana type bands, singer songwriter. I've played blues gigs, I've played country music, but that's what a jobbing musician does. And before the pandemic, what that meant was picking up the telephone, and sometimes I'd get a call at 8:30 in the evening, and somebody would say, "What are you doing tonight?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm watching TV. Can you get to the Get Me High Lounge in a half an hour?" And I'd go, And so that's what jobbing musicians used to be like. Now the pandemic killed everything. Uh, I used to, at the height of the business, I was playing 500 gigs a year, which is a lot.
Wow.
Now, you know, and the reason I could do that was because I used to play the late night after hours gig at the Green Mill that started at 2 a.m. So during the summertime on a Friday, I could play 4 gigs. I could play a lunchtime concert downtown outdoors. I could play an after work happy hour gig at some hotel downtown, then go play a rock and roll gig from 9 o'clock until 1 a.m. and still make it to the Green Mill and have 4 gigs in a day. Nowadays, I'm lucky if I play 3 or 4 gigs a week, and I'd say I'm lucky. Uh, like last week, I don't think or 2 weeks ago, I didn't have a single gig.
Well,
So
I see on your news from the trenches, sometimes you will be looking for someone to play with you. Sometimes you are looking for a gig to play. But I also see pretty regularly that you are playing at Simon's on Clark. And I think there's one other place that you play regularly.
yeah, the
Tell us about
Ravenswood
those
Tavern.
gigs.
So my band has been playing at Simon's at 5210 North Clark. We've been playing that gig for 25 years now. This new gig, we played the first Monday of the month at the Ravenswood Tavern on Montrose Avenue in Damon. We've been doing that for 5 years. That's another thing about aspect of my career is I have kind of been the king of the long standing gig. I played at the Green Mill for 30 years every Friday night. Um, I played at a place called Bacino's Pizza on Wacker Drive for 17 years. I've had many gigs that I've hung on to for a long time. And I like to think that it's mostly because the musicians that I use and the music that we play at these gigs uh, keeps people coming back,
I'd like to hear a little bit about what it's been like since the pandemic, which really took the breath out of the long haul of gigging musicians for a time. But you seem to have these 2 regular gigs at the Ravenswood Tap and at Simon's as ongoing things. What's your general take on the scene for not only your band, but the musicians as a whole, and particularly focus on jazz here in Chicago?
I'm kind of a little bit removed from the jazz scene in general, so I can't speak with much authority. There seem to still be plenty of places for people to find gigs at, but I don't think that very many of the gigs pay a lot of money. Uh, and mostly, I think that, and it's always been this way, it's a lot of the younger guys, younger musicians coming out of college who have got the energy to go out and find a new place and turn it into a venue. It's not like, say, and you'll remember this, the old town days or the old Lincoln Avenue days, where there were 20 bars on Lincoln Avenue and in Old Town where you could play gigs and make a little more than we make nowadays. You could make a living playing jazz gigs, and many people did. I did for a long time, playing 5 or 6 jazz gigs a week until I found out how much money you make playing weddings. You play a wedding, you make the same money on one wedding as you made the whole week playing jazz gigs. But since the pandemic, uh, there are not that many wedding gigs, and there are probably more bar gigs than there are what we called jobbing dates. But the downside is that the bar gigs pretty much pay the same or less than they did 40 years ago. And
Yeah.
that's the truth. Uh, 40 years ago, you might make 40 or $50 at a bar, and that was considered pretty good money back then. That's still what you get paid at certain bar gigs nowadays. And of course, compared to the dollar back then, $40 is it's a tank of gas.
Yeah. Well, Steve, let me ask you, with a scarcity of jobs that are good paying, um, how else you've turned to making a living? I know that you do graphics work, you do covers for people's albums, and I know that you do this wonderful email every week called News from the Trenches, where you're selling off your comic books and various other things. Talk a little bit about News from the Trenches, how people can get on your email list, and in general, life, money making life alongside being a musician.
Yeah, well, to use the pandemic term, I've had to pivot many, many times. I've always done graphic design. I actually worked as an art director and as a publications director for many, many years. And when I lost my last full time day job, when I lost my first time day job, I decided to see if I could be a full time musician. And that's when I became a full time musician. And that would have been in 1984 or 1985, I think. So, yes, I do. I design posters and flyers and CD packages and basically whatever for mostly for musician friends of mine. Recently, I've been teaching quite a bit. I teach basic guitar for the Park District of Oak Park, and I teach bass at the School of Rock in Oak Park, and I have private students as well. Um, the writing of the News from the Trenches, it's a pretty long, involved story how that began, but I've always loved to write, and I feel like doing this every week has sharpened my skills as a writer and as an editor. And so I've been doing a little bit of editing and getting paid for it. I did some proofreading and editing of a crime novel lately,
Uh-huh.
and I edited and proofread a religious book by a Haitian pastor 2 years ago. Cleaned up his syntax. His English was not very good. So, those are things that I'm basically, I try to make a little bit of money every day doing something.
Well, that's great. So why don't you tell me, we got about a minute left, I think, of this segment of Live from the Heartland for the week of March 16th. Why don't you tell me your upcoming gigs, be it Ravenswood or Simons?
Okay, so Simons, we are playing on St. Patrick's Day, which is this coming Sunday, the 17th. So like I say, Simon's is usually the third Sunday of every month from 9 to 11:30. And Ravenswood Tavern, which is at 1829 West Montrose, first Monday of the month from 7:30 to 10:30. I also run a jazz jam session the first Tuesday of the month out in Willow Springs at a place called the Irish Legend. So those are my kind of my steady gigs. And I
Well,
try to fill in whenever I can, you know.
yeah, well, I'm going to come see you. Tell people how they can get the news from the trenches.
Send me an email request at Hashimoto at AOL.com. That's HASHIMOTO at AOL.com. And I need to have full names because it's a list serve. So if you send me an email, tell me who you are, and I'll put you on my list.
Well, I love getting it every week, and it is filled with information. And for those people who want to follow the lives and the end of life of various musicians, you've got the information. Steve Hashimoto, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I think we'll probably see each other more often. And I want to thank you for joining us on Live from the Heartland. Everyone else, stay tuned. We'll be right back. I think we're going to have a short musical break by something that Steve is playing. So
Okay.
don't go too far from the left end of your dial. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of March 16th. And I am Michael James, still up here in the 49th Ward. And it's really always fun to bring on a very good friend and old pal, Peter Kuttner. We go way back to the Rising Up Angry days, even probably a little bit before that. Peter came back to his hometown of Chicago and worked with Newsreel, putting out progressive films. He's been involved with Cartemquin Films. He works in major moving picture world with as a cameraman, and he can correct any of the mistakes I might have made. But we're here with him today, as well as with Shelby Brand, who is the Human Resources and Health Risk Manager at Paramount Theatre in Aurora. And we're going to talk about a film festival that's going on. We're going to talk about a film by Haskell Wexler. We're going to talk about some labor struggles that are going on in the industry. Anything I missed, Peter?
No, nothing you missed, but in the terms of correcting things, I have a correction of cameraman for two reasons, and I think my emphasis on man tells you what the first correction is. We don't do that anymore. We talk about cinematographers, directors of photography, camera operators, camera assistants, still photographers. Man doesn't come into it.
Well, I'm really glad you did that, and you've always been one to correct me when I make big faux pas. So with that said, he's a camera person. He knows a lot about films. He wrote great film reviews for the Rising Up Angry newspaper between 1969 and 75. And Peter, why don't you start off? And Shelby, you can jump in too. Let's talk a little bit about the film festival that led to you all coming on. We're talking about the Workers' Rights Board Labor Film Series, which we covered recently. and we're going to cover monthly for a while to come. Hit us up with some info, Peter.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I became, when I stopped working in the industry, I still kept working with the union because a lot of my political energy over the years went into my workplace and my union hall, because it, as we'll discuss later, it really sucks up your whole life. When you leave for work, you don't know when you're coming back. It's not uncommon. It's very common. The normal workday is now 14 hours, and it's common to work up to 18, even 20 hours. The union that represents us has been fighting this with the producers for many years. The thing that really set it off was in the late 90s, I believe 97, maybe 98, a 32-year-old man who had the same job that I had as a career, at the end of a 90-plus hour week and a 19-hour day, wanted to drive home to see his kids. They were about an hour drive from LA. His kids were sick. He wanted to get home. He got about 5 minutes out of the parking lot at 2:00 in the morning, ran into a tree and died. There was a huge outrage, and the film tells us about this. And that's when long hours, which had been a standard in the industry for many years, came into the headlines. Shelby is here because she works with theater workers in the stagecraft department, they call it, of the IATSE, which is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. They began in the late 19th century as stagehands in theaters. When movies came in, they put projectors in the theaters, and then the union became involved in movie making and the showing of movies with the projectionists. So the Workers' Rights Board of Jobs with Justice, which is a support group of labor struggles around the country. There are chapters in all big cities, has workers' rights boards, which does hearings about these labor struggles. I've been on that board for some years, and I suggested to them that we do a film series starting in January, which we did. The film series is to address current labor problems, particularly in Chicago, but also nationally. The first one had to do with healthcare, when we had workers at the Howard Brown Center on strike, both in Lakeview and on the South Side. The second one had to do with the UAW strikes over the last year. And we're coming up on our third one, which has to do with the motion picture industry. Everybody will remember, I'm just going to say one more thing, Michael. Everyone will remember last summer when two of the guilds, the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild, known as SAG-AFTRA, of which you are a member, went on strike, and it was all over the news. Everybody knew about it. The contract of the behind the camera, behind the scenes workers comes up at the contract runs out on July 31st of this year. Negotiations started a couple of weeks ago, March 4th, and will continue to the 31st, with the union saying publicly if they do not have an agreement, they will not extend the contract, as often happens, but they will ask me and the rest of the members whether we're willing to strike or not, and threaten the producers with that one tool we have. And that's why we're showing the film now.
Let me just say that as someone who works not as often as I would like, but in film, I know what you're talking about, or observed these long hours on the set. And I just want to let people know that the film, once again, is Who Needs Sleep? And it is made by Haskell Wexler, and maybe we'll talk about him a little bit later. And it is going to take place on Wednesday, March 20th at Columbia College, room 310 at 1104 South Wabash. So with that said, I'd like to say hello to Shelby and get a little bit of information about what the Performance Arts Theater in Aurora is about, what you as the Health Resources and Health Risk Manager at the Paramount Arts Theater, what that involves, and how are things going over there?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really lucky to get to be here and speak about this point because not only am I working in this position, I actually worked behind the scenes for 8 years, doing wardrobe, so the hair, the makeup, the costumes. And then I went back to school, got my master's in public health and occupational safety, workplace safety, and found myself back in a theater, which I never thought I'd be at again, because in all honesty, you don't see jobs like this popping up in theaters where they're caring about the health and safety of not only the employees on the front lines of the production, but all their employees in general. And I was really intrigued and gunned down to go when I saw Paramount had a job posting like this. And so Paramount is in Aurora, Illinois, and we do have one of the, you may think about some of the large theaters in downtown Chicago. And we're the same size as that, as the touring productions. We've got a house that can fit around, I think it's 1,600 audience members. And we do large Broadway-sized productions. Right now, we're putting on Billy Elliot. And we also have a smaller, more intimate space, which is around 165 seats. And we've got an outdoor music venue, concert venue, River Edge Park, which can hold upwards of 5,000 patrons. And we'll be opening another smaller size theater this coming summer. And so as the human resources and health risk manager, I'm in charge of all of these spaces, as well as our employees who are working at their desks in the box office, front of house, etc. So there's a wide range of people.
How many of the workers over there are in the union? And just in all of the venues that you have stagehands, so to speak. Are they all in the union?
Yeah, so we have the stagehands. So those are the employees who are working to put up the set on the stage, take down the set between shows, as well as the stagehands who are working during every production. And so it varies the number of IATSE members we have working depending on the size of the production and how large a crew needs to be. But when we're in the summer, we also have the stagehands working at our concert venue. Additionally, we have stagehands who are working in our scene shop, building the set. So they're not necessarily there during the show, but they're there building the sets and working long. They're kind of different type of long hours, but long hours indeed, and slightly more hazardous work at times.
What kind of hazardous work are we talking about, and how often does a hazardous issue come up?
So if we're working in the scene shop, I mean, these employees are working with power tools, machineries that you would see in factory or large industrial settings, construction. They're if we're looking at OSHA, the Occupational Safety Health Administration, we're following guidelines under the construction industry for people who are working in our scene shop, as well as the stagehands who are putting up and taking down our sets. They're high up in the rafters. I mean, I couldn't tell you the exact height of our stage, but if you've ever been to a really large show, they're very tall prosceniums, and they're up there, whether it's on aerial lifts or climbing up ladders and stairs to get up to the top. And so we've got fall hazards, we've got machine injuries. You've got welding too, which is another hazard of its own. And then the hazards that, I kind of think Who Needs Sleep touches on that a lot of people don't think about. You may think about, cutting yourself on a power tool, but the lack of sleep or the long hours actually take just as much of a toll on our health and are actually a lot more common than cutting yourself on a machine, maybe, because a lot of workers are facing those day in and day out.
Let me ask either Peter Kuttner or Shelby Brand. Does where was I going with that? I'm so sorry. We'll have to edit that.
I can tell you that there's a lot of crossover here. I didn't realize that Shelby had worked in theater, and I'll ask you if you were a member of the Wardrobe Union, which is Local 769. If so, the film, they cover both theater and film. But more to the point was, we said before we went on the air, these rafters that Shelby referred to in the theater also exist in the film studios. And just a couple of weeks ago, we lost an electrician who fell probably 20 feet while he was rigging some lights for a particular production. I was quite moved by the union community that raised close to $100,000 for his family through the various locals.
Does how do you say it? IATSE, AITSE.
Well, there's various. It's
pronunciation.
IATSE is it sounds like the dice game Yahtzee. VIA it's often called.
Is there a your demands, the union's demands, or the things you would like in a contract? Does it currently address sleep deprivation?
Absolutely. We have been asking since that terrible incident where the young man's name was Brent Hirschman. We got together a petition, collected 10,000 signatures in a few days. I know that I personally got over 100 on a film called Home Alone 3, which you never heard of. I've worked on a lot of movies that have numbers after the title. And unless the title is The Godfather, you don't get famous working on movies with numbers after it. But the film tells a story about how those 10,000 signatures of both what we call above the line and below the line, which is everything from directors and who are on the set down to those of us who carry stuff around and sweep the floors and things, sign this petition. And strangely, it was lost. And the film tells part of that story as well. So every year we're trying to get shorter hours, put a cap on the hours. As I told you earlier, it was a 19-hour day for Brent before he died. The petition called for a 14-hour day. Eventually, it got pared down to a movement that the filmmaker Haskell Wexler got behind, known as 12 on, 12 off. Now, this is 100 years or so after workers died fighting for an 8-hour day. Here we are looking for a 14 to 12-hour day. So yes, it will come up. A key issue, looking at the other end of it, is how much time you get off. You're able to work 19 hours because you come back 8 to 10 hours after you've been let off. Your time starts when you leave. You go back on the clock as soon as you get back. That leaves you 10 hours or less to eat, shave, shower, look at your kids for a minute, smell them while they're asleep. They're asleep when you get home, and they're asleep when you leave for your next day. I was
Go ahead.
able to work out a plan that even if I had worked all night and I was sleeping when they woke up, they were instructed to come into my room, wake me up, and we'd have a little talk about what was going to happen at school or what had happened the day before. And luckily, I was able to go back to sleep. But I did
You're a
that
lucky
for
guy.
many years.
Shelby, let me ask you, what would you say are the conditions at the Paramount Theater? Do you have long hours? Do you have, are you part of the union now, or you are part of management with the human resources and health risk management position you have?
So I'm part of the management and the human resources department. Peter, to kind of answer that, I was never part of the union because all the theaters I worked at, wardrobe is kind of a different world in some aspects in theater, and there's not as many theater houses that have wardrobe union when a lot of them do have other stagehands in the union of IATSE. But I've been seeing that in theaters throughout the Chicagoland area, that's where I'm most familiar with, a lot of individual theaters have been trying to put rehearsals more back into the daytime versus in the evening to try to kind of meet more of a normal day schedule. But the problem doesn't only come in when we're talking about long work hours. It also comes in when we're talking about irregular work hours. So specifically in performing arts, you've got a 3 to 4 week period where you're maybe working during the day for your rehearsals, but then once the show opens, now you're working at night. And that some theaters are Tuesday through Sunday, some are Wednesday through Sunday. Monday is typically the day off. But I lost my train of thought. But
Even young
but then
people,
you're
Michael,
shifting.
even young people lose their train of thought sometimes.
Yeah. But then you're shifting from working during the day to now working at night, and even the 5 or 6 days a week you're working on a production aren't the same every day. So you're not being able to have a regular work schedule, which is what we think of with the 9 to 5 work day.
How many union workers do you have at the Paramount Arts Theater? And is there any discussion you're aware of their concern with their contract and the upcoming negotiations?
Putting a number on how many employees we have is hard because how it shifts drastically, but and we also have a lot of sometimes stagehands or other types of workers that aren't represented by the union because you need to have worked a certain amount of time, et cetera. Then there's fees due. Sometimes people choose not to join the union or they haven't been working long enough to be part of the union and have representation yet. And I would say, depending on the number of productions, we could have 40 at a time, and it can go more or less, depending. I haven't personally heard anything about the upcoming negotiations, but when I was working in the industry and today, it's always been a conversation about the number of hours worked, the time between, especially because people who are working behind the scenes, they're not only working during the rehearsals and during our tech weeks, which is when we're preparing to open a show, but then they're having to also work at times when the actors and the directors and other people aren't on there to make changes or updates to the set or the costumes or something. So their hours are just extensive and keep expanding.
Peter, let me throw that back at you too about the hours in the film industry.
Oh, well, first of all, I'd like to point out a few things that theater workers are not working under the same contract we are, and the upcoming negotiations have only to do with movies.
Okay, thank you.
So we have this similar thing. In fact, a phrase came up was we start Monday morning early, maybe to get a sunrise. So we're out there even before that. And we work through the week these 14, 15 hours days going longer and longer, so that by the end of the week, and much of this is planned by the producers, we're coming in to shoot all night work and to work all night on it. So that you go to work on Friday and you come home midday Saturday. And workers started to call those Fraturdays, that the last day of the week was Fraturday. And then that you'd repeat. So you'd lose a day of sleep, a night of sleep, and then you'd be back in for that sunrise on Monday morning. So it's abusive, and and it causes the danger of it. It becomes a safety issue because you start making mistakes at a particular time. And I don't want to leave this without saying that there is a possibility that there will be another strike in the film industry, which the first two strikes were devastating, not only to the actors and the writers who were involved in it, but it was devastating to us too, because there was no work. And people have, what I've heard, numbers between half down to a third of the workforce that are back to work since COVID and the strike shutdowns. So I just want to say that if and when we do go on strike, I really hope that not only the theater workers, the actors, and the writers who we supported last year will be out to support us, and that the viewers who will be pissed off that they won't be able to see their shows will understand that once again until we get some kind of reasonable workday.
Well, both in
You watched the Oscars last night. Jimmy Kimmel did say they will stand beside IATSE if and when they have to go on strike, because IATSE stood by them between the Writers and the Screen Actors Guild when they went on strike.
Absolutely.
Well, whether it's theater or whether it's film, the show must go on, but not unless there's a good contract. And let me ask, we have about a minute left. Peter, would you tell us one more time the name of the film and where and when it's showing?
The film will be showing on March 20th at Columbia College. Not a random choice. We've been trying to show our films in places related to the work that we're discussing. Columbia College is one of the leading film schools in the country, and the local crews in Chicago are full of film school graduates from the local area. In fact, as I understand it, you'll have Columbia College crews and DePaul University crews. It will be showing at 6:30 when classes let out, and we're hoping for a lot of young people to come to that.
Well, that's a lot of information. I want to thank you both. And I want to thank everybody who helped make this show possible. That would be our engineer, Hal James, our producers, Tom Clark, Katie Hogan, and Lynn Orman. Last week, we had Alan Mills on and Tom Clark. That's worth watching. You can get that if you go to our YouTube site. Have a great week. Do good in the world. All power to the people. Over and out. We want to thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show. New episodes air every Friday beginning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Episodes air each following Thursday on CAN TV, 9 p.m. in Sweet Home Chicago on Channel 21, or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. Audio episodes go live on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM, or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast on Lumpen Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpenradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, Remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Come to limb. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing